All right. Hello, everyone. We are live. This is LinkedIn Live session on data observability. I hope people can see it. Actually, to be honest, this is the first time I'm doing this, so I don't even know how this is supposed to work. I hope this is working. Uh, Let me see if I go LinkedIn. How do
After some illness this week, if no one can see me, I'm okay with that.
I?
I'll just use my voice,
There you go.
my face for radio.
Oh, well, Andrew, I am enjoying the view behind you.
Oh, okay.
So,
I just got a text message. We are live. So let's get started. So thank you everyone for joining from wherever you are, whatever part of the world. In the US, we've got Thanksgiving week going on. So a lot of people are taking off for this week. So hopefully you have more time with your family and enjoy. But welcome, Andrew and Kevin. We are
Thank you.
going to be talking about data observability. Andrew, let's start with some introductions.
Sure. I'll try and keep it brief, but I wear many hats, so that's always a challenge. Um, but probably the best summary is that I'm both an analyst and a journalist in the data space.
Mhm.
I write about data and analytics for the News Stack. I did so for ZDNet for about 10 years. And My own company, Blue Badge Insights, works with various vendors in the industry. And I also lead data and analytics within GigaOm and their research efforts. And I guess we'll be talking today about one of the reports produced under that umbrella. And I've been a database guy since the 80s. Although I don't think it's relevant at all today, I've always been very close to Microsoft technology, and I'm one of their data platform MVPs as well.
And a regional director, an RD,
I am an RD as well, yes.
which is a very rare thing. And from your background, you live in New York and you worked in Empire State Building.
I, I live in Manhattan, and everybody always is shocked to hear this, but I was born and raised in Manhattan as well. And yes, I did once have an office on the 72nd floor of the Empire State Building, but it was the other side of the building from what you get to see here. It was the south side. You're looking at the north side, but otherwise, right in the dimple there, right at the first kind of ledge. It was
Wow,
pretty cool to work in there.
amazing.
Yeah.
Kevin, how about you?
so thank you, Sanjeev, for having me. Andrew, it's great to hear about your background. And I lived in New York City for a while too. In my younger years, I had a view from my apartment of the Chrysler Building, which was quite nice.
Nice.
Um,
Yeah. People
so
confuse the
I'm
two
actually,
buildings a lot too.
yeah, yep. I was on the 33rd floor, which is hard to believe now. I live in near Portland, Maine, which has much shorter buildings, and spent some time in California and Massachusetts as well. But I'm with Eckerson Group. I'm VP of Research here, and joined Wayne 4 years ago. I was his client for a long time, Wayne Eckerson, on the vendor side. I also ran an analytics services team for EMC Pivotal for a number of years. In my role here, I write a lot about data management. A big theme right now is governed data management and delivery to support artificial intelligence, um, which uh, which is a big focus, I think, for the world because Gen AI has created a ton of interest in
Hmm.
AI, and now we got to figure out how to make sure we feed it the right inputs. So I think this data observability topic is very relevant. I hope we didn't just lose Andrew.
Yeah,
Sanjeev, do you see Andrew right now?
no, I don't. I think yes. So this is the beauty of living in Manhattan is everything is uh, everybody's connected all the time, and so I'm sure he's having some network problems, but he'll come back. We can get started
Okay.
very quick. Kevin, I've known you for years and years when you were at
Yeah.
Attunity and I was at Gartner, and you educated the market really well on the change data capture and the whole ingestion piece before Attunity got bought by Click. So I
Yeah.
yeah, and I was in Gartner at that time when we got to meet. So I'm on the West Coast in the US. By the way, New York. London and San Francisco are three of my favorite places in the world. And with that, let's get started on questions. So I'm going to start with Kevin, since you're on. How do you define data observability? Because your company is already in the process of writing research on data observability. Right?
Good. Andrew's back. Fantastic. So I'll answer and then I'll hand over to Andrew because he's produced the latest research on this. But the way that we define data observability is to say that it's a discipline comprising techniques and people, processes, and also tools, obviously, to help ensure the delivery of timely and accurate data. And it's got two subdisciplines in our view. One is data quality observability, making sure that the data has validity, it's complete, consistent, accurate, and so forth. And then the other would be data pipeline performance, which gets to timeliness of data delivery and contributing to that, the performance of different infrastructure elements, compute, pipeline components, network equipment, and so forth. So that's how we define it. I think it contributes to a bigger story, which is it's kind of the beating heart, in my view, of data ops, which also comprises CI/CD for pipelines, pipeline orchestration, and testing. And it also contributes in a big way to FinOps, which is helping control cloud costs and govern cloud costs, a big concern that we hear from customers. So that's how we look at it. I think I look forward to hearing Andrew's thoughts on this as well, as he spent a lot of time on it.
Yeah, actually, that was a great summary, and it sets the stage nicely for how we came to write this report. Because in previous years, we had authored key criteria and radar reports on data quality specifically, and honestly, that was a little bit dry. Number one, but it was still important. Number two. And GigaOm was, wondering what the future of that report was. And then, some analysis of the market made it clear some vendors were really just rebranding their data quality efforts as data observability, just kind of rebrand, using a new nomenclature. But as we dug in more, we came across exactly what you said, that primarily, in addition to data quality, data observability also has to do with a lot of the operations, including the data pipelines and how well they're running. And so this looks like a much richer subject. But it's also, data quality originally was really just looking for things like garbage characters and having to deal with deduplication and things along those lines. This goes back decades, actually. And now it's many more things, like how fresh the data is, and how well distributed it is, and using machine learning, lots and lots and lots of machine learning, to see if anomalies are occurring in the data just statistically. So we've gone from what was really kind of a brute force, rules-based QA technology into looking at the health of data in many of its facets. Sanjeev, you're muted.
Yeah, I was trying to get the LinkedIn Live open, but then there was a lot of cross talk going on. So anyway, the question I have for both of you is, I see there's always this discussion about, is data observability a standalone category or is it a capability? In fact, interestingly, when we look at even data catalogs, although data catalogs have been with us for years and years, we're still having that discussion. So I'm just curious, like, Andrew, let's start with you this time. What makes something a category? And do you think data observability falls in that space? And then we'll move over to Kevin.
I'm smiling because this is almost an issue of analyst and research observability. What makes a category versus what doesn't? And I find myself asking myself that very question over and over. Is this really a category? Because it's starting to overlap with a bunch of other categories. But unless we just take data management as one huge mega category, then which, I mean, boy, can you imagine a radar report on data management all up? It would be 1,000 pages. We do have to break these things down into separate categories. And I also think, a large part of what defines it is, are there a lot of pure play companies in that space? If there are, then it kind of defines a category that probably deserves to be investigated in a discrete way, discrete ETE, not EET. It is, but on the other hand, we're starting to see almost every data management category take on facets of the other. I suppose companies like Informatica may be sort of chuckling at all this because they've always kind of looked at that broad scope, and so they show up in a lot of our reports, as a matter of fact. But yeah, it's definitely a category. The thing to remember, though, and I'll pass it over to Kevin after this, is that there's kind of a maturity model whereby these categories kind of enter the market as such and eventually kind of get onboarded as features into broader platforms. And I think there's all kinds of reasons, including how new companies get funded, that explain that. But it's a phenomenon that applies to lots of data categories, not just this one. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, if one of the criteria for something to become a category is if the large number of pure play vendors, that that seems to make sense. But then it reminds me of this current times with by the way, we are living through this whole OpenAI soap opera drama that's going on, but vector databases have been a very big thing, and we see all of a sudden there are probably a dozen pure play vector databases, some proprietary, mostly open source. But then again, the same question comes up: is that a category or is it a capability? So I just wanted to bring that into the picture, although this is not.
We're working on a key criteria report for vector databases right now, as a matter of fact. But yes, it's on the fast track to becoming a feature.
Feature, yes. Although there are many pure play companies. So Kevin, what's your thought?
Yeah, great question. So I agree with everything Andrew said. I think that you need to have the existence of pure play products, which shows that there are specialized capabilities that have to be addressed in a robust way and in a dedicated way. And so we've got companies like Monte Carlo, Soda, Telmy, plenty of others that are pure plays. But then I think also to be a category, it's going to overlap, and in fact, that's a sign of validation. So IBM bought Databand. There are a lot of catalog companies, as you pointed out, Sanjeev, that are getting more serious about observability, which makes perfect sense. So I think the overlap is inevitable, and in fact, a validation of the value of that category. So I would say data observability is a category. We do see a lot of convergence between the two subsegments that I talked about. A lot of companies that started with quality are getting into, some are getting into pipeline performance. And then companies like Unravel that started in pipeline performance, they're getting into data quality as well. So companies that are addressing both would include Excel Data, Unravel as examples, also IBM Databand. So those are some thoughts. The one other, I think, interesting thing worth noting about convergence and overlap is that, as I mentioned before, this big push with AI right now is, I think, inevitably going to drive a lot of demand for data observability tools that, yes, focus mostly on structured data, but that structured data is going to have to assist so many of the Gen AI applications that even though they're creating text, they need to wrap that text around facts that they can rely on. So I think that's another critical area of overlap that will drive growth in the overall data observability space.
So so many things I want to pursue at this point, talking about data quality and reliability, all that. But before I even go there, just trying to create this baseline for observability. So the space of observability by itself is not new. We've had it for almost 10 years. We used to, actually, on the infrastructure side. There are billion-dollar companies, actually $2 billion, which would be Datadog, which is actually it's so funny because Datadog is so big in the space of observability that every data observability company wants to be the next Datadog. Datadog is funny because it has data in its name, but it doesn't do data. Although they are also trying to come into the space, but they do mostly infrastructure, APM, application performance management, and so on. So,
Yeah.
so that's a category, right? Uh, would you say so?
Observability is
Yeah.
definitely a category. I would be a little cynical and say we used to call it monitoring, but it's always nice to have new shiny words for older things. But yeah, but data observability is, I wouldn't say it's the subset of observability broadly speaking, but it's a specialized application of it for
So,
sure.
Yeah, and just a quick note that I've my thesis is we have 5 and actually 6 now shades of observability.
hmm,
There's data quality, data pipeline, and then there's model observability for ML models. There's also business observability, all the business monitoring tools that are looking at vast numbers of metrics and how the patterns relate to each other. And there's also FinOps, which I think FinOps observability is a thing now. So yeah, there's a lot of observability and they all kind of contribute to each other.
correct.
Generally, operations observability and data observability seem to be pretty distinct given the nature of data intensive workloads versus operational applications.
So what really amazes me is what Andrew just said. Data observability is a sort of a subset of the observability space. I have a theory, which is that when data centers are big and we all had on-premises data centers, we all needed our own observability. So it was a very big deal. But as we have transitioned uh, more and more into the cloud, uh, the end user does not need the infrastructure observability as much because that infrastructure has already moved into the cloud. The cloud providers need it. Large companies that have data centers need it, but for vast majority, they don't. Data observability, on the other hand, is something that everybody needs it because everybody has data. And it is the most important asset. It is what's driving AI applications is your data. So if I use my
People need it now more than ever because data is getting to be the fulcrum of so many things, and obviously AI is the one most prominent right now.
So if I use my bias towards data, I feel data observability as a category should be bigger than overall observability because it has a bigger footprint.
Yeah, that's why I was saying I don't think it's a subset. I think it's a special application of it, but not niche because
Correct.
data is at the root of so many things now competitively that if you're not keeping real time tabs on how it's all going, both the quality of the data and the quality of all the operational things around the data, transforming it, moving it, and otherwise, you're in a very vulnerable place. So suddenly it's super valuable. Whereas before, we see this a lot, right? Things that used to just be elegant and maybe very necessary only when things are running in large volume now are critical because data is not just kind of a cool thing that people are doing to be progressive, but it's just becoming a key ingredient in running a business.
Very true. So let's go back to Kevin. Kevin, you started saying there are 6 types of observability. Can you tell us what is the scope like? So, and like if you were to rank it, like how big? How would you rank like data quality? You called it operations. Uh, so, what's the scope of data observability?
Well, I think there are a few ways to answer it because there's so many dimensions that it's hitting. But with data observability, I think we're looking at sort of 3 phases, which is uh, monitoring. So actually, excuse me, it's assisting the planning phase. So helping you make sure that you're designing things well, helping make sure that you have the right insights based on prior workloads to design robust pipelines and ensure that you do the right checks. Then there's the active sort of operations or monitoring phase, where you're trying to spot the patterns and the anomalies using machine learning, as Andrew was saying. And then, of course, there's predicting and preventing. That's the third stage or phase, which is critical and increasingly important. There are a lot of ways in which these workloads are relying on real-time data and real-time accuracy. So if you're running a fraud prevention algorithm, you want to make darn sure that you react quickly to evidence of model drift caused by drifting data values or broken pipelines and things like that. So I think those three things, planning and then monitoring and predicting and preventing, would be the scope. And it's going to try to figure out, amidst a lot of signal, a lot of logs, a lot of traces, a lot of metrics, and other, looking at data payloads, what are the patterns, what are the breaks in the patterns that signal issues to act on.
That is great. How about you, Andrew?
Tell me the question once more.
So what is the scope like? What do you do in data observability? What are the steps?
Well, I guess, as we were kind of deconstructing what it's made up of, I may end up repeating that a little bit, but we looked at key criteria in our report around things like monitoring changes in schema, data pipelines, we already mentioned, applying machine learning and other types of AI to operational health. And we also have a key criterion around edge capabilities and edge devices, because obviously they're in the business of collecting data. So to the extent that you can do data observability work all the way at the edge, that can help in lots of ways too. It prevents less garbage from going in and therefore less garbage from going out. And arguably it also...
So if I may interrupt.
Sure.
So if I may interrupt, so the first step you're saying is that a data observability product should have a vast number of connectors to whether it's edge devices or databases or whatever you're monitoring, and have the ability, you said schema, so have the ability to profile that data, understand how it's being distributed, how it's laid out. So that's step number one.
It's a lot like a data catalog, right? The first step is to connect and ingest and scan and analyze before much else is done. Yeah.
Okay. So what happens after that?
After that, I think we're going to be spending just a lot of time keeping real-time tabs on, the quality of the data and also the healthy operation of the pipelines that are delivering it.
So anomaly detection, and this is where you were saying earlier, using some automation through ML and AI to determine that certainly the data volume expected is different from what actually came in.
The volume, you also want to make sure that the data is not getting stale. So if you haven't kind of received a certain amount of data in a manner that's typical based on past performance, that's an issue in and of itself. So data recency, as I was saying before, distribution of the data and other profiling metrics are going to be part of it too. And then of course there's all the operational things around the data, around managing it, around delivering it, around moving it, around sharing it, and so forth.
So all the monitoring of quality issues, operational, so pipeline, if something broke, a pipeline and data didn't come in. And then Kevin, you mentioned also cost, what's happening to the cost. FinOps is a very big part of this.
Very much. Yeah, we hear from companies that feel the cost of cloud computing constrains what they can achieve. And so the more that organizations can make intelligent decisions about how they're going to configure and operate and anticipate
Yeah.
consumption of cloud resources, especially in Snowflake or environments like that, the better. So there are interesting innovations from companies like Unravel that are helping kind of get more serious, and they're closely aligned with the FinOps Foundation, which looks at documenting a lot of best practices to help people get smarter about planning, operating, and predicting and responding to consumption of cloud compute in particular.
Yeah.
Things are getting less agnostic too than they used to be in the older data quality days. So what I mean by that is separate yourself from the context. You want to make sure that you don't have garbage characters. You want to make sure that you don't have duplicate entities and things like a customer table, things of that sort. That's generic though, right? One of the things data observability solutions can do now is actually apply data validation rules that are customer and application specific and apply those on the fly and use that as one more input into evaluating data quality.
That is good. By the way, there's another use case that has not yet shown up in on our radar, and that is security. And the reason I think it's because the typically CDOs, CIOs, and CISOs all have had very different siloed roles. But I think as data becomes the focal point for even AI applications or anything in future, I feel that having observability of the security aspects like policies, entitlements, uh, whether buckets are secured or not, access rights. I think all that will become yet another data observability use case. Right now, it's sitting outside, but to me, it just makes no sense because all of these use cases are driven by the metadata, and security is just yet another metadata with a different use case and a different persona. But what are your thoughts? Like, we never talk about security as one of the use cases, but do you see that?
I mean, I kind of view the security side right now as falling inside the data security governance. We've got a report on that too. But as you kind of alluded to before, all these different pockets of data management, it's not, they're not mutually exclusive nodes in a cluster, in a scatter chart, right? This is a Venn diagram. They all have intersections and overlaps. So yeah, I could see detection of PII data and a bunch of other things coming into the real-time observation that these observability solutions look at. Yeah.
Kevin?
Definitely agree. I think it's a great observation that both of you have made. And what's interesting is that it boils down to metadata. Logs have rich insights that contribute both to the security discipline and the data quality discipline and the performance discipline as well. And so there's no question that there's overlap and synergy there. In fact, there are companies that have in the mid-sized area as well, in particular, said, you know what, I have a SIM, security information event and event management platform, and that's great, premium offering, everything else, but I've also just got a ton of logs, and it can add my capacity if I put in a log management platform to help handle performance monitoring and looking at security. So there are ways in which security contributes to other types of observability. And I think that kind of trend can make a lot of sense for companies that are looking for ways to cost effectively go through these vast array of signals about what's happening in their environments and extract insights from it cost effectively.
Yep. So I wrote a report. It's on my Medium site where I added yet another aspect to data observability, and I created a term just as looking to see how do I club it all together called data biz ops. And it's business operations, which is something I derived from my data products research, where I'm saying, how often is a data product used? who is using it, when was it last refreshed, and this is at the business KPI level. This is to measure productivity. So basically, I said, you have to measure quality, operations, pipeline, observability. You have to do FinOps and business operations. I've not even gone to security. So this is the scope that I defined in my report. All right. So moving on in. So sorry, Kevin, you want to say something?
I just say that's very cool. It's a new concept to me. It makes logical sense because data products are getting a lot of focus, figuring out how to have these modular, reusable, publishable, and shareable sets of data
Yeah.
within an organization. And I think it makes perfect sense to look at the business measures associated with those data products. So I love the concept.
Yeah, thank you. Because, one of the biggest problems I hear from CDOs is their number one goal is to show value. And one of the aspects of that is productivity. But it's so hard for data teams to convey this is how productive you were. This is the ROI of your investment in data. So I feel that data biz ops might be one way to ascribe some productivity numbers. So.
It makes sense.
And the other thing I also want to point out, Kevin, you raised a really good point. So a lot of companies, vendors look at logs. In fact, infrastructure companies will look at HTTP logs and all kinds of security logs. Then some look at metadata, which is really important. And then some companies look at actual data, which is the hardest thing, because now you're at the data level. And I think the lower you go in the chain, the more granular you get in your observability.
I think that's true. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on in our chain. So we've connected to the source systems. We've done anomaly detection. Now what happens next? So alerts, notifications.
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny because everything gets very, very meta and self-referential, but we end up having things like dashboards and BI on our on our data quality and on the operational aspects of our data and on the telemetry data that's coming from processing the data. So a lot of the things that the data that we're observing is being applied to, we're actually doing with the data about its operational health. So that's a big part of it, is just being able to take a look at how well things are going. But there's also, of course, and this was true even in the data quality days, there were some platforms that would report issues of quality to you. There are others that would go ahead and in some automated way correct the problems. So machine learning can start to be applied to that, as well as can policies. And the policies can be rule-based, or they can even be generated as candidate rules for users to take a look at.
Kevin?
Great points, Andrew. Agree. I think as we both said, the need to be proactive and identify risks and remediate or reduce risk before they become big issues is critical. And so there are definitely vendors that are trying to help you spot hotspots in your network, misbehaving Spark clusters or other things that could slow down pipelines, especially for real-time use cases, and then kind of guide the data engineer, the cloud ops engineer, or whoever's managing these tools to take action. I think it's critical as an evaluation criteria to have configurable levels of human in the loop. You don't necessarily want to automate remediation because that could make things worse. Robots making too many decisions. So that's one point. The other thing I was just going to point out is that from the practitioners we talked to, including the director of data quality at Prudential Securities, Laura Sebastian George, she joined a CDO event we had about a year ago. And she was really emphasizing the need for people and culture and training. Tools do a lot. At the end of the day, you need to have people that are changing behavior, which is that's a tough thing. Having people take ownership of being proactive. That's a tough bridge for a lot of companies to cross, but an important one.
Yeah, because it's not always possible to remediate the issue, right? So I think data observability companies serve a very important part, which is to triage the problems and, to your point, be very proactive. Sometimes even before the problem has happened, you have a circuit breaker that says, okay, you should stop this because we've detected some anomalies, and then give the root cause analysis of that as fast as possible. But I've come across cases where in a large healthcare, the problem may have originated on a mainframe and then sort of got sent to a data lake, and all of a sudden you're not going to go fix the mainframe. You can only uh, come up with a very, very good analysis of where you think the problem has surfaced, and then apply the circuit breaker.
Yeah,
It's a tough
circuit
set.
breakers were an important feature that we looked at in the report too, very, very specifically. Axle data is a good case in point there of a vendor
Yeah.
that values them. Sorry, Kevin. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to point out, I agree with that. And I think that there's often a workflow associated with remediating issues once you find them and compressing the number of data engineer hours or other types of roles, their hours they spend on remediation. And I think Monte Carlo's done a good job of demonstrating how they can help shrink the hours associated with data downtime and the effort to reduce it.
That is good.
Yeah, Monte Carlo, definitely. I would also credit them with coining the phrase data observability in the first place. But
Yeah. So let's go to the report. I think one last thing I want to mention before we move to the report is that another important aspect of data observability products is to manage how alerts and notifications are raised, because it is so common, and this happens even in the observability space, where so many alerts get raised that after a certain time you start ignoring them. So this concept of alert fatigue sets in. So that's another important aspect.
and then alert jadedness follows soon after.
Yes.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
this report was a big undertaking. I mentioned at the beginning how it just kind of grew out of a data quality report that didn't actually have that many vendors, and that was maybe getting less popular than it was the year prior, and that was one of the reasons we wanted to refocus. But we have, something like 15 vendors in this report, I think, which is well above average. And
how did you include them? What was the inclusion criteria?
Oh gosh, well, we have our inclusion criteria are what we call our table stakes. And let me see if I can get the.
While you're looking at that, Kevin, how many vendors do you think you'll have in your report when that comes out?
Well, the report that my colleague Jay Piscianieri is going to put out is going to be more about adoption trends and best practices for data ops, and then with a focus on data quality observability. But we did a report last year, a landscape report. We had 15, I think, about 15 vendors as well. A little different mix from Venture. We had some more other companies that were more offering observability as part of a bigger story, as part of a data fabric, data management platform, or catalog, that kind of thing. Okay. And the way we kind of divided up was, is it quality only, sort of pure play, or is it data quality plus data pipeline performance? And then is it just focused on observability or also other types of data management activities? So a classic example would be IBM
Yep.
or IBM
They
buying
bought data band.
Data. Yeah.
Yeah.
So our table stakes included, I mean, I don't know, table stakes kind of sound obvious after the fact, but data profiling, dashboards and data visualizations. Again, this is for the data about the data, and analytics and lineage. And very important compared to the old school data quality is the ability to do continuous monitoring and alerting rather than just saying, pushing a button and saying, okay, scan everything and tell me what you found.
Yeah.
The idea is to do it operationally in real time and constantly, because there's no such thing as off hours anymore.
I love that aspect. I think that is such an important aspect because I see some observability vendors do after the data has already landed into the destination. But I think the farther left you can do this whole shift left, the sooner you can detect. So that data in motion versus data at rest. So, Andrew, I find it really interesting that your inclusion criteria was very much focused on capabilities, features, as opposed to when Gartner does a Magic Quadrant, it also looks at things like, maybe revenue figures in some cases for big companies, not for small, like emerging categories, but geographical presence, number of referenceable customers. So it looks at a lot of those other aspects as well.
GigaOm's legacy has always been to, and I mean, this goes back to the first incarnation of GigaOm, when O'Malley was leading the company, to be looking at emerging vendors and things that were very cutting edge. So, and we also try not to be a carbon copy of Gartner, even if we start with the letter G. So yes, our inclusion criteria typically are different, and we don't look so hard at revenue and geography. It's true.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's go to your report. So who were some of the companies that stood out? Let's talk about your findings.
Yeah, gosh, there are so many, but well, we mentioned Monte Carlo and Axel Data, along with Telmi. Those were the three leading the pack, with Monte Carlo overall. And then, what's interesting here is, other than Informatica and Precisely, they're not, and Experian, they're not too many big names. IBM is in there too, forgive me. But we've got others, I guess. Kevin mentioned Soda. We've got companies like Validio and Kenzu and Siflid and Big Eye. Anomalo is another one, and others. So there's a lot of startups in here. But like I said, Monte Carlo really tried to kind of pioneer the category in the first place. Telmi and Excel Data are close behind. And then most of our vendors, the way our radar works is the bottom half is what we call the innovation half. The top half is maturity. And then left and right is feature play and platform play. So the bottom right, you've got the innovators building whole platforms. And most of the vendors are in that quadrant. We have Precisely, Informatica, and Experian in the top left, which is feature play and maturity. And I don't know, that's kind of the geography of it all. A lot of vendors.
Yeah.
Too many times.
So Monte Carlo is by far, I think, the most well-known in the space. Axel Data has been around. I think Axel Data may have started before Monte Carlo, if I'm not mistaken. Some of those founders came out of doing very deep Hadoop work, and so they've been doing a lot of that kind of observability for a long time. Actually, Unravel was also in that space before Unravel pivoted more towards doing FinOps. Because I remember I used to see them at Strata Data Conference like 5 years ago, And their big issue with the problem with Hadoop was that if it failed, all it showed was Java exceptions and some hexadecimal number. You had no idea why that Spark job failed or what happened. So they started in that space. I find it very interesting talking about Telmai, the other one you mentioned in the top three. I ran into the co-founder of Telmai at Data Council, Austin, and I was pretty impressed because he came out of he ran the platform engineering at a company called Signal FX, which did infrastructure observability, and then Signal FX was acquired by Splunk, which is now part of Cisco. So all these three companies have come from very, very different starting points, but have kind of converged into this one space they're calling data observability.
It's interesting to see that the recent acquisition that Excel Data did a month or two ago of Bugle, I might be pronouncing it wrong, Bewgle. And what they're helping do, they're getting into the space of text and large language models and Gen AI. And so that company, they're going to use it to give sort of a conversational interface to help guide users and have more intelligent monitoring of data quality, data pipeline performance, but also start to figure out how to help deliver accurate inputs to LLM models. And so that'll be a whole new chapter because a lot of these LLMs, as we know,
Yeah.
are dealing with text, and text is not traditionally not very structured. It's not structured by nature, but it's also not very governed. And so that's kind of the next wave of requirements for quality, which are much more subjective and depend by the company, will relate to text. So I'll be very interested to see what Excel Data is going to be doing in this regard.
Yeah, it's like how do you detect data quality in a free form flowing text document? What is data
Well,
quality? Yeah.
I know it's a good question, and actually, we've been looking at that internally for a amount. I think that what it gets down to having very good metadata that
Hmm.
can that you can use to tag and categorize text files, so that when you use them when you put them into a vector database and it's used for to enrich prompts or it's used to train models, you have high confidence that it's accurate and vetted. So documents, business documents, product documents, things like that. It could well be that master data management becomes critical because you've got a bunch of customer records sloshing around. You want to make sure you're using consistent identifiers for the customer data. But it's tricky to determine exactly how you
Yeah,
govern text.
correct. I think the most important thing, and again, it takes me back to security observability, is detecting sensitive data in documents.
PII, yeah.
Yep, yeah, like, and I think with these LLMs, it actually might be easier to do it than in the past, because in the past we had to have a regular expression. Let's say I'm looking for social security number, so I'm looking for any presence of 3-digit dash, 2-digit dash, 4 digits. But what if somebody didn't put dashes? Then how do I know, is this my airline frequent flyer number or is it social security? But an
Yeah.
LLM can predict and say this number, which is how many, 11 digits, 9 digits. This 9-digit number came after the word social, not even social security number. So I'm going to tag it as PII, something like that. And then I'm going to
Yeah.
make sure that this is cleansed and not go into training a model.
We're starting to see, in the context of the data access governance stuff that we're looking at right now for a report, that these companies that have traditionally just been looking at the structured data side of things are now starting to look at the adjacent generative AI relevant pieces of things. So you're getting governance around the LLM models themselves. You're getting sensitive data detection, to your point. It's the next logical thing. And quite frankly, like, first of all, it's important to do it. And second of all, a lot of these companies I mentioned that kind of pure plays eventually on board into becoming sets of features and broader platforms. If companies want to avoid that, then they've got to keep adding value. So that's a very logical place where value can be added. So we're starting to see that as well.
Yeah. And you could also have data pipeline performance observability contribute to LLM ops and to contribute to the performance and reliability of data pipelines that serve RAG, retrieval augmented generation, for enriching the prompts that go into language models. So a lot of interesting adjacencies there.
It's funny, Sanjeev, because you mentioned when you were talking about Unravel, I guess you said the problem with Hadoop was, and I chuckled inside because there were many more than one problem, which is why I think Unravel existed and why they gave themselves that somewhat curious name, because it doesn't necessarily inspire confidence. But their point was that you had this kind of cluster of lots of different things going on and you needed to deconstruct. That might be a better word. Deconstruct what was going on in order to keep the aggregate operations healthy. And I would say that's actually a good. It's a good model or a good template for the modern data stack overall. There's a ton of complexity, and there's a ton of there's a lot of dependencies on this stuff now. And so if we're not observing the health of it all, we're in trouble. And observing the health of it all is tough because there's so much complexity and so many subsystems. So we're going to need as much automation as possible.
Yeah, in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think modern data stack is a culprit that has led to data observability becoming so important, because it's such a massive jumble of very super specialized products that things can drop between different products and you would never know what happened. So you need that single pane of glass to see what's going on.
There's a lot of cracks things can fall through.
Yes.
And it's kind of funny, right? Because I feel like the so-called modern data stack evolved in response to the monolithic stacks from like Microsoft, IBM, SAP, and Oracle back in the day. Yeah. And I get why people were frustrated with that, because the innovation factor was low and the cost factor was high, but things were a lot more manageable then. And now things are so fragmented that it's kind of anarchic, right? So, but I think that is a cyclical thing, right? Things are going to get like very easily managed, but low on innovation, and then eventually there's a scientific revolution. If you've read Thomas Kuhn's book, and everything blows up, and there's a ton of innovation and excitement and new companies, and but things are very difficult to manage operationally, and I think it oscillates.
Yeah. In fact, talking about new companies, there are. I'm surprised how many new companies have pinged me lately. It's just starting in the space, and I'm sometimes shaking my head because I feel the space is already very crowded. But like I said in the beginning, if this space is going to become a massive multi-billion-dollar industry, then I guess it will have room for these. One company that I actually really like, which is not in your report, is DQ Labs, because they do very deep data quality. Of course, Big Eye, Anomalo, they do it really well. Sifle, Kensu, I think they're very prevalent in Europe, with some presence in the US, I'm guessing. And then there are a number of new players that are just now coming into the space. Kevin?
Yeah, I think what helps create opportunity for new startups is that we're in a multi-cloud world. Most enterprises have multiple cloud providers, and they still have a long tail of stuff on premises. So while the hyperscalers and even Databricks and Snowflake want you to have everything with them, they don't. And so that's why the trick of observability becomes very complex the minute you have two platforms and you have stuff that needs to go between them. That heterogeneity is what will create the continuing opportunity for startups in this space, I think.
Yeah. Andrew, did you have, take us home. We have only a few minutes left.
Well, I think it's just great that we had so many vendors, and then you pointed out there's a bunch of others. So clearly, this is a growth area, and that's good. There's going to be a lot of innovation, and probably and especially with generative AI, there's going to be a lot more surface area to cover. And the generative AI, as it already has, will work in both senses, right? We'll need to govern and monitor the operations of generative AI inference and training, but also probably generative AI capabilities will be inserted into the data observability platforms as well. And you guys mentioned a couple of examples of how that might work or how it already has worked. So I don't think this report's facing any kind of obsolescence very, very quickly. And it's, in general, it's good. I get very frustrated when the industry is just so enamored of new capabilities, but it doesn't tend to prioritize the manageability and the governance of things. And so here what's nice is we kind of have a place that's focused on the governance and the manageability and is finding opportunities for new capabilities within that realm. That's a good alignment, I think.
Yeah. Kevin, any thoughts?
Not completely. I'm hopeful that the Gen AI craze, amidst all the hype, it is causing real corporate dollars to go towards AI. And I'm hopeful that that'll create sort of a renaissance in governed data management and as part of that data quality, because companies will have no choice but to get more serious about data quality. That's the hope. And I do think there'll be a lot of innovation.
That is great. Great. I want to thank you both for coming and everybody who joined this live presentation. I was having some audio problems, so I couldn't go to LinkedIn live at the same time. So I'll have to go back and figure out, if there are any questions there. But this was amazing. Thank you so much. I hope we'll do more of these sessions and tackle some of these new paradigms and new developments that are taking place.
This was one of those rare conversations where I'm a guest and I'm learning stuff. So I enjoyed it a lot.
Very nice.
Likewise, I learned a lot from both of you. Thank you very much.
Likewise, I always do. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Take care. See you.
Thanks.
Bye.